talk about the budget that's passed the Senate that we're going to see in the House this evening. And I guess one word or a little phrase is, you show me your budget and I'll tell you what your priorities are. So we're here today to talk about our priorities and what the Democrats' priorities are and why we think that our priorities better fit the people of Illinois. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the chairman of the Illinois Freedom Caucus, Representative Chris Miller.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for all these rascals that came today. Thank you all for coming out. And like Dan said, my name is Chris Miller. I'm the state representative for the 101st District and also the chairman of the Illinois Freedom Caucus. In just a few hours, the House will begin the process of voting on the budget. Until yesterday, nobody had any idea what the particulars of this budget were because the budget negotiation took place behind doors and basically the Republicans were all locked out. We all know what's wrong with this process, but we also know nothing is going to be done about it. The insiders will laugh at those of us who want to be part of a more open and transparent budget process, but because we don't have the votes in the House or the Senate, that our opposition will be ignored. But is this process really in the best interest of the people of the state of Illinois? And we all know the answer to that is a resounding no. The money being allocated in this budget does not belong to J.B. Pritzker, Chris Welsh, or even Don Harmon. The money being spent belongs to we the people. The question is, are we really acting in the best interest of the citizens in this budget process? We're talking about spending $50.6 billion of taxpayer money. Shouldn't we have more time to consider what is exactly in the budget? Wow, we have more than an hour this year, most likely, to discover what's in the budget, which will be a slight improvement over the budgets of the past. But we have been in session since January. We had the budget address in February. We have had plenty of time to make this process more transparent and more accountable. There's been plenty of time to give the citizens an opportunity to have actually had input into this process. Instead, essentially, three people have decided how to spend $50.6 billion. This process is wrong, and you and the media know it. But until there's enough outrage and enough anger among the electorate, nothing is going to change. The media has an important role to play in telling the story. The one takeaway from this press conference should be that what the Democrats are doing to the people of the state of Illinois is wrong. And once again, the people of the state of Illinois are getting the bohica. So please help us tell the story and let's change Springfield for the better. Some other observations on this budget that we need to address include the sheer amount of money being spent. We're again setting new records for spending here in Illinois. The budget is $1 billion more than the budget that Pritzker actually introduced. Even as year-over-year revenues in April were down $1.8 billion and overall expectations were $800 million than estimated earlier this year. Lawmakers are getting another pay raise, taking our base pay to a whopping $89,600. That's before committee salaries, etc. Most people here will be making over $100,000 for a public service position. Also, we are not extending the Invest in Kids program, which is a travesty. We're adding new programs and new spending while failing to address the long-term solutions to our major fiscal challenges facing our state. The $700 million payment to the Pension Stabilization Fund is not insignificant, but making a balloon payment is not a permanent solution. We need meaningful pension reform if we want to solve the pension crisis. The Democrats act as though this one-time payment is responsible budgeting. The truth is that years of ignoring the pension crisis has made our state pension problem almost insurmountable. Imagine if we had an extra $700 million to spend on something other than paying the pension debt. Because of the majority party's refusal to push long-term solution to pensions, we are forced to continue to pour money into our pension system, which puts tremendous pressure on our budget and does little to solve the problem in a meaningful way. On page 157, the budget allocates more than $7 million for the Commission on Equity Inclusion. Now let's think about that for a minute. What do they do? Who is in charge? How often do they meet? What is the commissioner paid? Important information like this are things that the people of Illinois should be able to know. On page 29, here's another good one. Line 10 is a line item of $300,000 to Black Lives Matter of Lake County. Another nice gimmick to the political allies of the Democrat Party. The budget is full of giveaways like this at the taxpayers' expense. Finally, this budget allocates hundreds of millions of dollars on programs for services of people who are here illegally. Now think about that for a minute. We're using taxpayer dollars to give away to people that are here illegally. This budget spends 10 times more on services for people who broke our federal immigration laws than we are spending on children forced into failing schools and then entirely killed the Invest in Kids scholarship program. The Democrat leadership cares more about kids residing here illegally than they do about kids in their own neighborhoods who their parents actually voted for the representatives to be here, supposedly representing them here in the State House. We could be helping kids escape failing schools. We could be helping men and women who care for the developmentally disabled. Instead, we are pumping money into programs for illegals. To say these priorities are misguided is the understatement of the year. And that, I yield my time to Brad Holbrook, Representative Holbrook.
Thank you, Representative Miller. State Representative Brad Holbrook, the 107th District. Thanks for being here this afternoon. Earlier this spring session, my colleagues and I did a press conference here to discuss education funding. During this press conference, we highlighted all of the efforts of previous governors to highlight early education. Every governor from George Ryan to J.B. Pritzker has made early childhood education a priority. And yet, here we are again, creating yet another early childhood education program. None of us up here have any issue with spending $250 million on an education program, but we cannot ignore the policies and past precedents when considering the new programs and the new initiatives. The assumption is that the spending more money is going to create better results, but this is not the reality of our education system. I think it's worthwhile to take a look again at how our education spending stacks up to our surrounding states. K-12 spending in Illinois is $16,277 per student for a total of just over $32 billion annually. Indiana spends $10,256 per student for $10.8 billion. Iowa, $11,935 per student for roughly $6.1 billion annually. Kentucky K-12 schools, $11,278 per student for $7.6 billion. And finally, Wisconsin schools, $12,694 per student for $10.9 billion annually. Wisconsin has the 8th best public schools in the U.S. Wisconsin ranks 5th for quality, tying with Minnesota, and the highest median SAT score. Wisconsin's pupil-to-teacher ratio is 15-1, lower than the U.S. average. Illinois is ranked 15th best school. Kentucky and Iowa ranked 19th and 20th, respectively, while Indiana is ranked 22nd. The point of all of this is Wisconsin spends nearly $4,000 less per student than Illinois, and their schools rank much higher than Illinois. We spend an average of $5,000 more per student than Kentucky, and yet our schools rank 4 spots higher than in the Bluegrass State. Illinois is spending a substantially higher amount per pupil than our surrounding states, yet in terms of academics is producing very similar results. There is no correlation between money spent and outcomes. Again, no one has any issue with spending the money on education, but given what we are spending on education and given the fact that surrounding states are doing as much or more, in one case, more with fewer dollars than being spent, we must demand accountability in education spending. It is time we ask, what are we getting on all this state spending on education? Results matter. And with that, Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for the invitation from the Freedom Caucus today. Martin McLaughlin, 52nd District, Northern Illinois. Happy to be here, and thank you for letting me make a few comments. 3 weeks ago, I was on the floor 2 days before the immigration rules were about to change, and I realized we had a significant problem. I asked our staff to provide to me the amount of money that had been sent to Chicago based on the illegal immigrants, illegal migrants, whatever the current vernacular is, and frankly, to me, it's not relevant. But what is relevant is the amount of money that was sent, $250 million between August and January of last year. Now it looks like we're going to spend another $1 billion too. Priorities for me as a former business owner and also running a town are incredibly important in the budget process. And I think one of my colleagues mentioned our priorities are completely out of whack. We all get solicited, as you know, in the media by people to come down here to allocate wisely tax dollars. I have had people in my office from Misericordia Home for developmentally disabled looking for assistance. They're not getting paid enough on an hourly basis in SILAs to take care of our most vulnerable citizens. I've had a number of people come in for sexual abuse victims and a number of centers that they need to continue to operate. There wasn't enough money in the budget to do that. And finally, I'm fortunate to be on the Illinois Kidney Foundation, where Black and brown communities are being underserved. In all three of those instances, I would like to say to them and look them in the eye and say, absolutely, we're allocating our budget properly in Illinois. But instead, we find out in the late hours of last night that we're going to send $1.2 billion or more to non-citizens from the state of Illinois. To me, that is a malfeasance of executive authority at a level that I can't understand. I can't understand it as a former mayor who ran an actual balanced budget for 8 years, reducing spending. To me, it is something that the citizens of the state need to know about. They need to be aware of it, and they need to hold their representatives accountable for this fiscal malfeasance. So I want to thank the Freedom Caucus for being here today, and I want to hand this off now to Representative Wilhauer. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. You look good up here. Appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate these other guys speaking here. I want to talk a little bit more about education. That's a big priority for me in Springfield. I'm the minority spokesperson on the K through 12 Education Appropriations Committee. Obviously, education is a big part of the budget. It should be a big part of the budget. We talk a lot about education funding and spending money on education. We talk a lot about how we're underfunding education, but I think it's important to note that we're spending more money on public government education in this state than what we have ever spent. And as Representative Halbrook alluded to, we're spending a lot more per pupil than pretty much every state around here. So we pour money into this education system consistently in this state. And although we do all that, since we've done this education funding formula, this substantially increased our level of spending, the proficiency results in reading and math have gone down. Now we can talk about the factors, why that has happened. Sure, COVID had some to do with it, but that trajectory was already there. And we see in the shadow of all of this stuff that's going on, all of the negative results, this year we're piling on another $250 million for the Early Start initiative. And like we have talked about, nobody is opposed to spending money on education and even early education, but the fact remains, are the results there that signify that these are good measures that our state, that our education bureaucracy is actually ready to deal with. I think that we should do a lot more focusing on getting our proficiency levels up into the K through 8 programs before we pile a bunch more onto the State Board of Education that really over the past 3 years has done a really dismal job in almost every aspect. Nobody disputes the goal of educating kids. It's how we do it. It's how do we trust the people that's spending this money? Do we trust that they're prioritizing it wisely? Just continue to pour billions of dollars into an education system that has basically failed our kids is not what we should be doing. And, we just want to ensure that this money is spent effectively. And I want to talk about an effective program. I think Brad and Chris both talked about a little bit here, a program that was a very, very important part of making the education funding formula bipartisan. It's to invest in kids. If a bill to extend this program were to come to the House and the Senate floor for a vote independently, I think that it would probably pass with bipartisan support. It's certainly going to be fascinating to see that. But when we go onto the House floor to begin debating this budget, the Democrats are going to lecture us about not caring enough about kids because we're opposed to this budget. They're going to say that opposing this historic education spending is cruel, and they're going to accuse us of not caring about kids. But it's because we care about kids, because we actually care about not just money in education, but outcomes in education, something that's hardly ever talked about here. That's why we oppose this budget. It's a big reason why, among other things. Spending money for the sake of spending money is not a real education plan. And gifting these special interest groups everything they want is not a real solution to the education needs of this state. If we really cared about kids in this state, if we really cared about outcomes, if we really cared about kids that are underprivileged in a lot of ways out of no fault of our own, we'd extend this program because this program is effective. There's 9,700 students that are receiving scholarships in the 2022-2023 school year, and there are 22,000 kids that are on a waiting list for this program. To me, that screams that this is an effective, credible program that people in communities all over our state support. 22,000 kids. This program is a success, so when programs like this are a success and they get outside the bounds of the education bureaucracy, outside the bounds of the powerful special interests bureaucracy, it's a threat to those folks. And when there's a threat, they have to get rid of it. And I don't want to mince words on this. I'm not known for mincing words in this place too much. This one and only reason that this program is not getting extended tomorrow morning in the budget is because the teachers union. The Illinois Education Association does not want it, okay? They don't want it. They're putting pressure on members of both parties to oppose it, and that's the only reason. So we're literally denying people the ability to make a real difference in education of kids to protect the interest of a teachers union and frankly the campaign donations that they make in this state. If we've seen anything over the past 3 years, these special interest groups have done everything but put the kids as the number one priority in this state. The Invest in Kids program cannot be allowed to exist because it exposes the failures of our education system and the failures of the teachers unions that drive it. When families are given a choice, oftentimes, especially in the underprivileged areas, they choose to send their kids to schools that aren't the failing government schools. In a lot of cases, it's a no-brainer. But instead of helping kids get a good education and escape failing schools, we're doubling down on failed policies, and our kids and our next generation are really facing the brunt of it. We're the only state in the nation that's going backwards on this stuff. And like these guys said, it's time to demand accountability in how we spend money, and we need to prioritize kids, not the special interests, like we do every day in this state, not just on education, but pretty much on everything else. But with that, we'll take some questions.
Well, first thing you said in this news conference was, show me your budget and I'll tell you your priorities. And last night, one of the Democrats, who's Leader Sims, said, Republicans, where's your budget? And that may be said tonight. So where's your budget?
Sure, I think we've outlined the things that are important to us. You know, if we get to a point where we're more than 40 members in this body, we would have the ability to do the budget. But I think that's a legitimate question. You know, we do need to do a better job as a party of laying out our priorities, being strong on things like putting parents back in charge of education. I think we can get more than 40 members, and we can have that discussion.
Yes, but nothing's stopping the 40 of you from saying, well, this is the budget, we're introducing it as a bill, and why don't you compare it to what you guys have put together? I mean an actual budget bill, you could introduce it.
Sure, I mean, go ahead.
yeah.
Lloyd.
So we've tried to do that through the appropriations hearing process, the working groups. We've tried to talk about the priorities. You know, they've got a framework to start in, so we try to talk back and forth. But 2-3 weeks ago, all of those working groups were shut down. The one group that I was a part of, General Services, stayed on a little bit longer than the other 4 in the House, but ultimately they were shut down. So when it gets down to the final hour, we don't get invited in, or they shut it down. So it's difficult to work through those things, talk about priorities when we're not invited or they're just completely shut down.
Starting July 1st, are taxpayers going to be paying more taxes or less taxes? And I'm thinking gas, groceries, drugs.
Oh, much more. Well, all of the gimmicks have run out. I mean, you know, the grocery tax, we'll get another gas tax increase July 1st. There'll be the second one this year, January 1st, and now another one in July 1st. So people of Illinois are going to pay more in taxes. That's a given. What we're waiting for I think the other shoe to drop, because there's no way that our state income is going to be able to sustain this budget or this increase, you know, with the trajectory that we're on. What was it, $36 million when we first started? Now it's $50 million, $38 million to 50? What?
We said million, it was with a B.
Billion, I'm sorry, billion. People can't put their arms around a billion, let alone 38 million. But yeah, it was $38 billion, and now it's $51 billion in 5 years, 5 budgets. This is a trajectory that we cannot support. Illinois, we talked about this here. Our income, our revenue, April, when everybody pays their taxes, April 15th, they add it all up and they say, how much are we doing? We were down over $1 billion in collected revenue. Why? Because the previous year and the year before that, Illinois' economy was all about unemployment, enhanced unemployment benefits, people getting unemployment for not working, PPP, all of the federal programs, all of the federal money that flowed in, billions and billions of dollars that flowed into this state. It stimulated our economy. It's gone. You can't build an economy on unemployment. We said it at the time. Our economy does not support a $51 billion budget. That is their estimate. We said $1 billion for the illegal aliens in their health care program. Who do you believe? What was the original estimate? 200 and some million. Now it's $1 billion? Do you really think that that's a logical number when you look at the influx of people into this state from the border? And we just gave the governor last night the unfettered ability to declare it a disaster and spend whatever he wants. And this is a program that he's going to spend money on. So we're going to see $500 million in this budget for this program for, you know, healthcare for illegal aliens. That's a half a year. That's a half a year. They know it's $1 billion. I think they know it's a heck of a lot more than $1 billion. This budget is going to bust us back to where we were when we couldn't pay our bills. We couldn't make our payments. We're headed right back to where we were 5 years ago.
So taxpayers are going to pay more for groceries, go back to that 1%.
Groceries and gas.
They're going to pay more for gas because the gas tax is going up.
Right.
You guys are getting a raise.
Yeah.
What do you think your constituents, or have you heard from your constituents about
We
that?
will.
And
Trust me.
What do you expect to hear from them?
So one thing I'd like to chime in, so I manage pensions for a living, and it's not just the increased cost. It's a fact, I'm sorry, it's not just the increased cost. We've got about 16% to 20% inflation rate. And Milton Friedman always said it best: inflation is caused by one thing, government overspending more than they take in. And the federal government takes in more, they create money out of thin air, they send it to Illinois, and we spent it, as Representative Calkins said. So it's not just the fact they're going to pay more. They're going to be able to buy a lot less because the value of the dollar is going down. So it's going to be a double whammy, and it's going to be incredibly painful for consumers in the state. And I think we're right. A year and a half from now, we're going to have to go back to spending levels when I got here at $39 billion 2 years ago. And if we can't figure out as a group, working together, that that's where we're going to need to go, we're going to go right back to the taxpayers with all kinds of gimmicks, progressive taxes, financial taxes in Chicago that the new mayor's talking about. Guys, we're taxed out in the state, so we better start figuring it a different way, and that actually requires spending restrictions. Terrible thing to say, but my Democrat friends on the other side of the aisle, I don't think I've ever heard them talk about lowering spending. These temporary government spends, these new programs, you know, Reagan said it best, there's nothing more permanent than a government temporary spending program. So if we could get back to the days of understanding the money's not going to be there and the money doesn't buy as much, I think we need to continue to message on that, and hopefully the people will understand we're trying to protect their income the best we can.
To the pay raises, though.
Well, we're going to all vote against them. I mean, this is ridiculous. These are part-time jobs. You know, if you're going to make these jobs permanent, I mean, Iowa, I think, is $27,000 for the same job. Wisconsin, $51,000. Indiana, $26,000. This is ridiculous. I was a mayor for a volunteer for 8 years. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I think everybody here agrees.
What do you think?
I mean, I want to apologize to the taxpayer. I've actually gone out last year and I thanked and apologized them, and I asked, were you aware we passed a pay raise last year at 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday? They were shocked, and I don't mean to point the finger at the media, but up in my area in Chicago, they didn't mention it to anybody. It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment to me as a public servant because, like my friends here, we all have other jobs and other businesses, and we're trying to keep this state solvent. So it is actually an embarrassment to have this done again. It'll be done, what, at 1 or 2 in the morning tonight? Let's do it at 4 o'clock right before your news cycle. You know, that would be refreshing for me.
26,000, 0, 50, you know, if I'm a lawmaker, I think, wow, 90,000, that is too much as a base salary. So,
I give it away.
that was my question.
I give mine, I have since I got here. I don't keep it. I take it. I pay taxes on it because I don't want to leave it here. And I don't want to leave it here because I don't like how they spend it. So I give it away the way I want to give it away.
What would you advise the Republican caucus to do?
Vote no.
And give it away like you do?
Everyone has to make their own decision. Everyone has to make their own decision. I did it because this isn't a job, and I didn't want to get hooked on it. You know, this is what happens when you get a big pay raise. All of a sudden, your standard of living changes, and then you have to stay here for 20 years to get a pension and to pay your bills. I hope that my example, will, lead other people to think more carefully. We don't take pensions. Pension system is broken. How can you advocate to reform the pension system when you're part of it? This is a problem. Lead by example. This is what we're doing. We are leading by example. Please help us get our message out.
Curious to hear your thoughts about Senate Republicans being able to be at the table up until the very last moment. Many of the Senate Republicans thanked their Democratic colleagues for allowing that for the first time to finally have that happen. I know that this wasn't the same for House Democrats and House Republicans, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. The fact that things are changing a bit in terms of the Senate. Obviously, Senate Republicans didn't vote for this budget, but something is changing over there and more bipartisan manner than what's happened here in the House.
Leadership. Not, in the House. Different.
Obviously, it's good that they were at the table. Good to, at the table in Springfield. I don't know exactly what that means. I'm sure that they weren't in the, smoke-filled rooms that were actually making the big decisions. But at the end of the day, they didn't really get any of their priorities that I could see there. So it's good. It's a good first step. Getting to the table. Hey, we're willing to talk to anybody. We talk to anybody that will listen. Put our priorities out there. It's unfortunate that the House is in just such disarray. You know, the Democrats can't decide what they want to do between themselves. That's why we're still here a week after we're supposed to be out of here. So they weren't really in the position where they could bring Republicans in to talk about anything, because they would have no idea what to talk about with the Republicans, because they couldn't get their own priorities together. So there's some different things going on there, but you know, at the end of the day, I think that we're going to have to get our message best to the people, and the people are obviously starting to feel the effects of generations of poor public policy, and it's our job to be there ready with solutions when the public finally says hey, we need to try something different here, because what we're doing is not working, and that's what we do constantly here.
Representative McLaughlin is a former city official.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the LGBF? They're increasing that.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard my, I came down here 10 years ago and was looked in the eye as a mayor and told, absolutely, we're going to increase it. And then, of course, it never did. And then last year, to great fanfare, we went from, 6.06 to 6.16, and 10% was the number. I spoke on the fact that most of that for smaller communities that I was mayor in goes directly into the pension obligation for police and fire pension. So when I hear my Democratic colleagues talk about how they're for pension investment, and then they vote against increasing the local government distributed fund, they're essentially going back on their word, on their promise to fund pensions. So yeah, to me, I'd rather have a dollar stay a lot closer to home than come to Springfield or to Washington, because by the time that happens, it gets scalped pretty good by the time it comes back. So it should be at 10%, and I am way behind that. And DeLuca put something up last year to go to 8. 8's not enough. Let's go to 10. And why wouldn't we go to 10 while we have all these, and I don't mean to be sarcastic, but we have all these balanced budgets, and we've gone up billions in revenue. Well, we've gone up billions in revenue because of inflation, and we've already spent it. But my Democrat friends feel so good about our fiscal position, wouldn't now be the time to go to 10%?
In the last news conference from other Republican members of the House, they talked about $700 million in personal property replacement tax being shifted. What can you guys elaborate on that, and how would that impact municipalities?
I don't have any comment.
Yes, I don't either.
Well, that's what they're trying to make up for that shortfall with. I mean, that's basically what they're trying to do there. And there's all kinds of things going on in that system where they've screwed up things, where they've overpaid and done things that they're trying to make up for. So I think it speaks to the mismanagement over several years of the budget process, and just, you know, you're chasing your tail around here, trying to make this budget work at the end of the day, and for everybody to be happy, which is an impossibility.
3 Senate Democrats voted against the budget, a few didn't vote at all. Obviously, there's been a lot of disarray in the House Democrats. Are you trying to get some of them to vote against it tonight, or tomorrow morning?
Well, I think there's ample reason for several of those Democrats to vote against it. I mean, you know, we put out a letter last week on the Invest in Kids. Got almost every Republican to sign on to it. Had several conversations with Democrats. There's a lot of Democrats that support this system. You know, if we think back to 2021, go look up the initial education pillar for the Black Caucus. Not only did it extend the Invest in Kids, I believe it removed the sunset, it upped the contribution cap, and put the credit at 100%. That's robust. We would love that, you know. And the fact that they're letting the suburban progressive squad come in here and bull that thing right out of the budget completely, yeah. I think that you should see every Black Caucus member put a no vote on the budget just because of that. You know, let's force this issue. In a lot of cases, it's their communities that are being marginalized by taking that away. You know, we've got the folks in our communities as well, but by and large, it's theirs. So yeah, I mean, that's just one example. There's plenty of reasons for them to, vote against this stuff and take a stand. It would be nice. It would be interesting, and I think that we would find that some of the things that are important to them are important to us too. And I think that maybe there's a pathway there.
Curious to hear your thoughts on the big press conference, the budget agreement, when clearly there wasn't an agreement and many of the House Democrats had not seen anything of the budget. The caucus actually started late. They weren't able to see anything of it. Did you hear from your Democratic colleagues about what was going on when they were shocked that
The
there
biggest
was a
thing-
control
yeah.
they didn't know what was going on?
I tell you, the biggest single thing that we hear from rank and file Democrats, we ask them all the time, hey, what's going on? I don't know. They have no idea. They said, well, you know, we know about as much as you.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.